Welcome to Macbeth Act 1. The frame that I'm going to use to discuss Act 1 is paradoxical circumstances. So we'll talk about what is being what it's not in this kind of ambiguous and in some ways very eerie opening to the Scottish play. All right, so when the play opens, we open on this heath, this kind of like foggy, foresty woodside in the middle of Scotland with these three witches who in some ways are beginning to set this kind of unsettling tone. But in the second scene, we're in this kind of cool Elizabethan way that battles were staged. So because the Elizabethan audience and Elizabethan playwrights and directors didn't have access to Marvel era special effects, they knew that if they tried to put a staged battle on the actual stage, it would maybe look a little silly, some ways maybe even a little cheesy, and you'd end up with what would be the worst thing ever for a tragedy, which is people laughing when they shouldn't be laughing. And so most of the gory stuff, most of the violent stuff in this play, and this is a pretty gory play, happens off stage. And on stage, we get messengers, in this case in scene 2, this bloody soldier talking to King Duncan, tells us all the stuff that's happening on the battle. So we're in the tents of the military commanders. The battle is waging beyond our sight, and yet we're told a story about what's happening. And the clear MVP of this battle between Scotland and Norway is Macbeth and his number 2, Banquo. And Macbeth here is seen as loyal, brave, noble, brave Macbeth. He's called Belladonna's bridegroom. Is this idea of he's very connected to the god of war. Macbeth is seen really just, he's breaking necks, he's cashing checks, he's unseeming men from the nave to the chops. He's doing just crazy Braveheart-esque kind of like stuff on the battlefield. And because of all this, at the end of scene 2, we're told that he's going to be named Thane of Cawdor, which is a huge job promotion for him. So if you're wondering what a thane is, think back to this kind of feudal system that maybe you've learned about in medieval history. You had the king at the top and then this kind of like hierarchy of lords and knights and peasants underneath him. If you were in that second tier, you were a vassal to the king or a thane, which basically meant that you oversaw a geographic area in which all of the wealth amassed in that area filtered through you on its way up to the king. So you could imagine being the Thane of Newtown or the Thane of Doylestown. But if you could stack some of these, which some of these guys are able to do, and Macbeth is on his way to do, you could basically become like the Thane of Bucks County. And so from, Quakertown out to New Hope, all these different areas would have their money filter through you, and you would become very, very wealthy. So at the end of the scene, when Macbeth is going to become Thane of Cawdor, we'll learn in a second that he's already Thane of Glamis. He's doing really well for himself. He's a pretty wealthy man as a result of these titles moving into the middle of Act 1. Macbeth, on his way home from battle with Banquo, now meets these three weird sisters on the heath where we open the play. They are weird, this is true, strange, unnatural. Banquo will describe them as seeming as women, and yet they have beards. They'll be seen to melt into the earth, which is bizarre because they seem to have physical shape, and yet there's this kind of like spiritual movement for them as well. There's just things about them that are unsettling. But an Anglo-Saxon word, weird, meant fate or personal destiny. It also meant to serve fate or personal destiny. And so the weird sisters for Macbeth and Banquo are very clearly prophets. There's no question for Macbeth and Banquo that what these women are saying is true. They fully believe it. And some of this is because we're dealing with what you might call a pre-modern epistemology. Epistemology, this is just a freebie, is the study of knowledge. It's concerned with how we know what we know. And so for medieval Scottish lord in this time period, these strange and unnerving things for him would have been very connected to God or the supernatural. So Macbeth is fully believing that these women have the ear of the truth of the future. He believes that the future is knowable. He believes that when these women say he will be king, that he will in fact be the king. And yet, very early on from these weird sisters, we get this confusion and we get this major paradox from them. So, a paradox, as maybe you've been told before, is a statement that contradicts itself. And the go to paradox for the witches here is this fair is foul and foul is fair. If you thought of this as fair equals foul and foul equals fair, you would say, well, that doesn't make any sense. How can something fair, whether you want to think of that as something that means beautiful or something that is just or something that is good, also be something foul, which is ugly, grotesque, disgusting. And yet the witches tell us in their three-part harmony that this is the case. So what they have here also, if we're getting real literary, it's called a chiasmus, which is a repetition of similar ideas in reverse order. So we have A is B, B is A, this kind of X shape, which is what chiasmus means most literally in Greek. And so you end up with this very tight structure for confusion that the weird sisters give to us. They say, here's things that also are not. This thing is both fair and foul at the same time. And so within that kind of eerie, shadowy atmosphere, this prophecy that they give to us that Macbeth is going to be king has this kind of false tenor to it. Is it fair? Is this good prophecy? Or is this foul? Is this a bad thing? We don't know. All we know is what they tell us. And yet the environment that it's delivered in is one that perhaps gives us some cause to question if this is good or bad news for Macbeth.